University of Limpopo. Great to have you with us once again, Victor. Good Friday afternoon to you.
Friday is always the best time of the week, Thami. Good afternoon.
It certainly is. I think this is probably also the best time for Kenya right now with the with the
Yeah.
discovery of what is the largest gold deposit for them in decades.
Yeah, it's then in the Kakamega County, which is in the west of the country, not far from Victoria Falls, if I may, just to give the listeners an idea of where this county is. It's Shanta Gold, a British company. They're talking about a 5.29 billion gold discovery. Large underground mine. They're going to use what they call long-hole stoping technology, which means they go underground, but they do not cause a lot of disruption on the surface. And it makes sense because they are not far from Victoria Lake, Lake Victoria, which is a huge heritage site, important for fishing in that area. So they are talking about 1.27 million ounces of gold, which could mean they could produce something like 1,500 tons per day of gold. And that's where the company is headed. Hopefully 3% of that going into royalties into the government of Kenya. Kenya has not really done a lot for mining. I mean, it has the resources, but it has just never somehow managed to catch on. I recall talking to the CEO of the mining Chamber of Mines, or whatever the equivalent is, more than 10 years ago. And I just can't tell you exactly what they're doing. Often when they try to mine, they run into either tribal land where the people, Maasai, will say this is of spiritual importance, or they run into the Kikuyu who will say we value this as our shrine, or something. Something always seems to get in the way. So let's hope that this one will at least go some respectable distance, because having resources underground, if you're not mining or exploiting them, will not help the economy in any way.
And I mean, that is worth an estimated $5.29 billion.
Yeah,
So what then
yeah.
would be the way forward post a discovery of this nature?
No, they remember mining is very expensive. If they have already done the exploration, that's the most expensive part, the exploration, the upstream business of this, because that's where you have to prove that you're physical and prove to the financier that there is gold underground and it can be mined. It's in the quantities, what do they call it, economically viable quantities. So it won't be a futile thing. Now they've worked out the technology. What's left is, I think, to negotiate the license to get the land acquisition going so that the land can be transferred for use by the mining company. And then you are A for away. But I think they will be arguing about the royalties a bit, because if you look at what's happening in Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, where countries, the governments have been able to get 15% free carry in shareholdings, then they might be stuck at that level. But once they resolve it, there are seemingly all the technologies in place and the expertise to make this a reality.
And moving on now to Dangote, we actually spoke about him yesterday and the strides that he's made and the investments that he's made in Zimbabwe. But this time, we know that Dangote has really been dominating in the cement industry on the continent, but competition intensifying in this area.
Yeah, Emson's Group, it's a Tanzanian company, which has bought 29.2% additional stake in the East African Portland Company, which is quite a long and old cement. They bought from Associated International Cement Limited and a company called Cementia Holdings. The deal is about $5.6 million. And I mean, 5.6 billion, and it is going to be giving them this percentage that it's not really gonna make any difference, because the infrastructural development in Tanzania, in Kenya, in that East African region, or if we can say in the Great Lakes region, whether you include Ethiopia as part of the East African community, is huge. So there's a lot of demand for cement. Bear in mind, cement goes into everything from mining to building residential to building infrastructure, roads, ports, harbors. So if you just look at how much of a construction industry is taking place in that area, Dangote has just been having a free reign because he's dominant. But this is just going to create competition. What it means, it will be better for people who are in construction, because they at least will be able to get competition on pricing and be able to afford the inputs much better.
And good news for Nigeria as well, having made developments now, having their first locally owned floating production, storage and offloading vessel.
Yeah, exactly. You know, if you read about the Nigerian oil industry, you hear all the time about bunkering, where people go target a pipeline and they punch a hole into it and siphon it and sell it privately. Now, when you use what they call FPSO, it's almost like, when you look at the tanker that moves around and mixes concrete while on the move, those kinds of, that's the closest I can get to the floating production, storage, and offloading vessel in the oil industry. It allows you to store oil, process it while you're on the move, so you don't need a huge pipeline from the coast to inland and vice versa. You can almost load the crude oil and process it, if you like, while you are on your way to where you have to offload it, whether you're loading it onto a ship for export or you are taking it off a ship and then you're developing it. So it's a very important development because it can process about millions and millions of barrels per day. But it's just going to go in line with what they call the Project 1 million barrels that was launched in October last year. But it's just getting the technology right so that you don't need pipelines because all those are subject to vandalism. So $315 million investment by a company called Oriental Energy Resources, a Nigerian company.
And as we log off for this week, our final focus is on North Africa's oil giant, that's Libya's Zalaf Oil and Gas Company. First for them too.
Yeah, first export, 600,000 barrels per day premium hydrocarbons. Is a subsidiary of the National Oil Corporation, so it's a state ownership. They made a deal. The company we're talking about was I think part of the 1968 first discoveries, but they made a deal with the American company called Honeywell. It's quite an established company which has all the technology in a $500 million investment deal, and they are celebrating the fact that they've been able to export their first batch or their first consignment. Bear in mind, Libya used to be a top producer of oil, and after the deposing of Muammar Gaddafi, the industry has been struggling to recover, and that's why this is a milestone. The quantities are not huge, but at least they are saying we are back in action, we are operating, and the mainstay of the Libyan economy will be restored. It's in the Sirte region, which is about 500 kilometers east of Tripoli, the capital.
Victor Khumusana, always a pleasure keeping us abreast of all the top business stories on the African continent. Until next week, give yourself a great weekend ahead.
You have a good weekend, Thami. Bye-bye.
Thank you. That's Victor Khumusana, author of Africa is Open for Business and Africa Bounces Back. He's also the Executive Director for Marketing and Communication at the University of Limpopo.
The world is watching Johannesburg. Leaders from the planet's biggest economies gather to make decisions that shape nations, markets, and futures. You already know Channel Africa will be right there, bringing you the conversations, insights, and analysis that matter.
The best is yet to come.
The G20 Summit from the 22nd to the 23rd of November. As it happens, from an African perspective, stay tuned to Channel Africa and get all the G20 analysis. From markets to innovation. From markets to innovation. Africa in Business with Thami Ngubeni covers it all. With Africa's future in focus, Channel Africa, the African perspective.
It is exactly 18 minutes after 4 p.m. Central African time. Now, the African continent is making progress in asserting control over its mineral wealth. This has emerged at a multi-stakeholder dialogue in Johannesburg, South Africa, entitled Turning Mineral Wealth into Negotiating Power, Africa and Critical Minerals Supply Chains. The dialogue sought to leverage the G20 platform in South Africa and to build a common narrative on critical minerals for the African continent. Ndlandla Mahlangu reports.
Senior African policymakers, international organizations, researchers and civil society gathered in Johannesburg to examine a critical question: how can Africa transform its mineral wealth into sustainable industrial and economic power? As global powers compete for minerals essential to clean energy, digital technologies, defense and space innovation, experts say Africa is at the center of a major geopolitical contest. They say recent developments signal growing momentum, but also bring forth the challenges that threaten Africa's resource industrialization ambition. The dialogue discussed expert perspectives on Africa's strategy to convert its resource wealth into inclusive long-term development. Depros Mchenwa, Director Resource Future in Africa at Open Society Foundations, says it's important that the meeting make some clear recommendations to the G20 and for the continent to seize the moment and see it as an African moment.
It is important that we think about strategies to secure the gains of the South African presidency of the G20, the Brazilian presidents of the G20, Indonesia's presidents of the G20, and India's presidents of the G20. Securing that legacy is important. Second is strengthening the bargaining power of the continent. One of the things that's happening now is forcing countries to be isolated into small zones and then negotiating with them as small as they are. We're seeing a very ruthless critical minerals. I don't want to call it diplomacy, but it's very transactional politics, which you isolate Lesotho, you negotiate with it. You isolate Zimbabwe, you negotiate with it. You isolate Ghana, you negotiate with it. And this is resulting in a fragmentation in policy and in outcomes. It's an opportunity to use this G20 moment to regroup the continent and use it as a moment to strengthen the bargaining power of the continent so that the discussions we are having now are not going to be held country by country.
The dialogue heard that Africa's strategic position in the global green energy transition, digital transformation, defense innovation, and emerging space economics is underpinned by its significant reserves of critical or strategic mineral endowments. Maxwell Gomera, UNDP resident representative, says it's time for Africa to leverage its mineral wealth for economic growth.
We must treat our critical minerals as leverage, not as commodities. The future is not in the rocks, it's in the rules, the ones we negotiate and enforce together. Africa needs a unified position anchored in the Africa Mining Vision and the AU's Green Minerals Strategy. One voice, one playbook, one set of non-negotiables. Second, we need to add value at home. Refine lithium in Zimbabwe. Assemble batteries here in South Africa. Manufacture green steel in Zambia. Think of it this way. Selling raw cobalt is like exporting flour when you could be exporting bread. The margin is in the backing. Third, we need to pool our power. No single African country is big enough. No single African country has big enough a market. But regional partnerships, like the DRC Zambia Battery Corridor or SADC's Energy Compacts, they give us collective weight. South-South cooperation is not charity at all. It is strategy. And it's about time we strengthen it.
Speakers have called for Africa to move beyond simply extracting and exporting raw materials and for the continent to exploit its mineral wealth to manufacture, industrialize, and create much-needed jobs. They also pushed for a common agenda and a unified voice among African countries to strengthen the continent's bargaining power in critical mineral supply chains. The dialogue was hosted by the United Nations Development Programme in partnership with the Open Society Foundations. Reporting for Channel Africa, I am Tlantla Mahlangu in Johannesburg.
Stay ahead with Africa in Business, where Thami Ngubeni unpacks your go-to source for Africa's economic trends and development.
It is 23 minutes after 4 p.m. Central African Time. South Africa's largest mobile operator, the Vodacom Group, has signed an agreement with Elon Musk's Starlink to deliver high-speed, low-latency broadband internet for businesses across Africa. Vodacom states that integrating Starlink's satellite backhaul into Vodacom's mobile network will accelerate network coverage expansion and also help reduce network performance in rural areas, enhance the network performance in rural areas. Now, Starlink was said to launch in South Africa as early as 2022. However, regulatory requirements led SpaceX to cancel its launch plans for South Africa. For more on this, we joined on the line by founder of Worldwide Works, analyst and technology commentator Arthur Goldstuck. Good to have you with us, Arthur. Welcome to Africa in Business.
Thank you very much. Good to be chatting with you again.
Now, so we understand that through this deal, Vodacom will now be authorized to resell Starlink equipment as well as Starlink services to enterprise and small business customers on the African continent. So could you help us understand the nature of this deal? Will Vodacom be more of a reseller, or do they stand to gain more from this partnership?
Vodacom will be a reseller, but they will also be a service provider of sorts because of selling the equipment as well. So they have to ensure that the equipment works on the ground. But ultimately, the service itself is provided directly by Starlink because that is the nature of the service in general. But it's important to bear in mind that they have not announced a rollout in South Africa, only across Africa.
Right. So Southern Africa and South Africa, we know that there were impediments there as far as BEE requirements are concerned. Where are discussions around the 30% ownership equity as stipulated in the Electronic Communications Act?
Well, there's one big gap in the whole picture so far, and that is that Starlink has not actually applied formally for a license in South Africa. And South African law requires that appropriate license before operating. So the Electronic Communications Act says that any electronic communication network or service provider must get the appropriate license. That's just the first hurdle. Then there's the broad-based BEE issue, where foreign telecoms operators have to have at least 30% of equity in the license holder held by people from historically disadvantaged groups. Now, there is discussion at the moment that has not yet been approved or turned into law to allow for equity equivalence, so investment locally as opposed to providing equity locally. But that is also still in the air. So you have two levels of regulatory hurdle that still have to be crossed in South Africa specifically. So there is currently public consultation on a new licensing framework for satellite operators or foreign operators, and they are looking at the equity equivalence model. And chances are that will eventually be passed, but there's tremendous political resistance to that. And then once that is out of the way, you still have to have all the equipment approved by the regulator, ICASA. And they call that type approval, where core equipment has to be licensed for use in this country, aside from any other license that's required. So 3 hurdles, but that last one is probably the easiest because every cell phone that comes into South Africa gets type approval before it gets sold in the market. That shouldn't be a hard one for Starlink.
We've focused a lot on the things that are up in the air. Maybe let's look at what's concrete regarding this particular agreement and which countries this is going to be rolling out in.
So it's going to be rolling out in every country where Vodacom operates and where Starlink is licensed. So it's a country by country issue, and it's more than a dozen countries we're talking about, and each one will have a slightly different licensing regime. But the intention of it is the same for all of these countries. It's to connect the unconnected by integrating Starlink satellite backhaul into Vodacom's mobile network to expand coverage, generally speaking, especially in rural areas. And that will bring connectivity to hospitals, clinics, and communities that are excluded from broadband access. They're also going to be offering these services to enterprise and small business customers. And they want to develop localized value propositions that are suited to African market conditions and affordability. So the packaging of the services will be geared towards local needs, even if the actual service itself is still delivered via satellite. Then they also say that they're responding to demand from very specific sectors like mining, oil and gas, agriculture, tourism, retail, financial services, and that will include pay-as-you-use backup internet services. So they're seeing this as a backstop, not necessarily as a primary service, but rather one that people can fail over to when the existing service crashes or undersea cables go down and the like, because it's a fairly expensive service. So the ideal is to use it when you really, really have to use it. But if you can rely on cheaper services, like broadband via undersea cables and 5G, then that would be the way to go. So what Vodacom is saying is that it adds a new layer to its portfolio. So it has 4G, it has 5G, fiber to the home, fiber to the office, microwave transmission, and now satellite coverage as well.
As far as the regulatory hurdles that this particular, deal is going to have to overcome, has Vodacom, are we aware whether or not Vodacom has started these type of negotiations, and if there has been any appetite from any of the countries to make these type of services available in their territory?
At this stage, as far as we know, it's still up to Starlink to apply for the licensing, but there's no question about the reality that Vodacom will be a conduit to applying for the licensing. And they have their relationships, they have their licenses, they have their understanding of the local markets as well in all of these countries. So it certainly could fast track the process. And there's no question that this would be good for Vodacom and good for Starlink.
And talking about the plus side for Vodacom, how might this deal change the competitive dynamics between Vodacom and its main rivals in satellite and terrestrial broadband services?
Well, let's put it this way. Vodacom had already previously announced that they would partner with Amazon and its Project Kuiper, which is the equivalent. They've now rebranded it, by the way. They're now going to bring out something called LEO, and that's the acronym also for the low Earth orbit satellite system. And that hasn't exactly changed the landscape because there are existing services that are a lot cheaper. And these, again, as I mentioned, are backup services, and they have not yet made an impact on rural connectivity, where Starlink has the potential in the long term to make a big impact.
And this is another huge positive for Vodacom because they've really been wanting to service rural and hard to reach areas across Africa. And this certainly looks like a tool for them to eventually be able to do that.
There's no question about it. One of the biggest challenges of connectivity across the continent is a tremendous amount of inhospitable terrain and very expensive terrain in order to connect up via fiber grids, for example. So we have a massive fiber grid in South Africa run by OpenServe, which is a subsidiary of Telkom, and it spans 180,000 kilometers of fiber. And yet there are many parts of the country that it can't reach because it's simply too expensive to reach those regions. And satellite comes along as the ideal solution. So it becomes a complementary layer to the existing fiber offerings.
All right.
And in the longer term, it basically fills the gaps.
Arthur Goldstock, always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for breaking that down for us this afternoon. That's Arthur Goldstock. He's founder of Worldwide Works, an analyst and technology commentator. He takes us to exactly 4:32 Central African time as we head over now to the markets desk, where Chanduko Likeke is standing by with your latest market indicators.
Business News on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Thami. Good afternoon. $1 is trading at 17 Rand 3 in South Africa, Botswana 13 Pula 63, Namibia 17 Namibian dollars 3, Zambia 22 Kwacha 55, Kenya 128 shilling 27, Ethiopia 153 birr 35, Uganda 3,000 shillings 617, Tanzania 2,000 shilling 438. $1 in Nigeria is 1,000 naira 440, Egypt 47 Egyptian pound 16, Tunisia 2 dinar 93, Algeria 129 dinar 42, Morocco 90 rand 22, Angola 912 kwanza, the Congolese franc is at 2,100. Commodities: gold is at $4,087, platinum at $1,542 per ounce, the price of Brent crude oil at $63.88 a barrel. That is all from me. For any business stories you'd like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za, or you can call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa Business, I am Chandruko Ligege.
Business News on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
It is exactly 4:34 Central African Time. Standing by with your latest business from the world of sport. Here is Musibudi Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Thank you so much, Thami. A very good afternoon from the Sports Desk. So former Manchester United star Rio Ferdinand, who has turned his focus now to investing in sport businesses, says the way younger audiences consume football is reshaping the industry and that companies need to adapt fast. Now, Ferdinand, who launched the Ferdinand Group, which is a sport as well as entertainment company, says the sport's next phase now of growth will depend on how effectively content meets the consumer.
My media company, Rio Presents, which hosts Rio Meets and different podcasts, my football agency and commercial agency, New Era as well, which are really thriving. And again, I'm from a football background, and that obviously encapsulates sport as well. And we want to speak to that, and new media is exactly the way to do that, and talking to people directly, seeing it from the horse's mouth and being a part of that culture and the ever-evolving culture as well, and that landscape's moving quickly.
Meanwhile, Ferdinand, who last year bought a stake in one of the Middle East Arabic language digital football apps, talks about his decision to invest in Saudi Arabia.
Everyone was saying, well, what you do, it's just a fast-growing place. It's a fast growth. We've seen with all of the investment that's going in there now, but in terms of media, football, sport in general, it's crazy the growth there and the ability to kind of go there and really get into that market. And actually, because I'm coming from where I'm coming from and my background, there's a lot of value I can add in that.
Onto this now. Turkish football temporarily banned 102 top-tier club players on Thursday over a widening betting scandal. Now, the Turkish Football Federation suspended 25 players from the Super League as well as 77 from the second-tier division, first division, for terms ranging from 45 days to 1 year. Meanwhile, Galatasaray as well as Turkey defender Eren Emali was suspended for 45 days. Now, club teammate as well as Turkey under-21 centre-back Metahan Balati has been suspended for about 9 months. Now, Almi posted on Instagram earlier on this week that he bet on a game about 5 years ago that did not involve his own team. He joined Galatasaray this year. Meanwhile, more than 1,000 players have been referred to the Federation's Professional Football Disciplinary Board in the ongoing investigation. The Federation has also shut down the third and fourth tier divisions for 2 weeks as the investigation continues. Well, Ferrari is the most valuable of the 10 franchises in Formula One. That's according to Sportivo latest team valuation published on Thursday. Now, Ferrari checked in at $6.4 billion, and the 10 teams on Formula One grid combined to exceed $34 billion in total evaluation as per Sportico's methodology. Now, the average Formula One franchise value is now higher than the average value of a Major League Baseball club. That's according to that report. Now, Formula One's $3.4 billion average valuation clears LMB's average to about $2.82 billion, behind only the NFL as well as the NBA in average franchise value. So after Ferrari, Mercedes come in second with a valuation of $5.88 billion, followed by McLaren in third position on $4.73 billion, while Red Bull are in fourth position with a valuation of about $4.32 billion. The home, of course, of four-time defending champion Max Verstappen. The least valuable team is Haas, that has a worth of $1.68 billion. And finally, on the local front, South Africa's Gauteng province has about 21 Boxing South Africa registered promoters, but only 4 of them have staged major bouts this year. Now, the Gauteng Boxing Promoters Association chair, Sandile Qaka, says that it is a worry that they have an association, and as a result, they are meeting with the boxing CEO, Tsolofelo Lejaga, soon to address this matter. He also says they need government to to intervene and come on board, plus the corporate sector, because the challenge is that the corporate sector is still reluctant to invest in promoters who want to stage township boxing events in the townships. And that's a wrap of your sports news this afternoon on Channel Africa. For any sports stories you'd like to share with us, send us an email. That's to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za. Give us a call as well on +27 11714 4459. For Channel Africa Sport, I am Musibudi Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective. Gratitude begins with a story. Find yours on Channel Africa. Now streaming on our new website and mobile app.
Thank you to Musibudi Makura and Chanduko Legege. They take us to exactly 4:40 Central African time. Now, the countdown has already begun to the G20 Leaders Summit. It takes place next week, and South Africa-based investment group Old Mutual has been championing for an inclusive dialogue through its Add Your Voice campaign. This is an initiative designed to bridge the gap between global policy discussions and everyday South Africans. Old Mutual says the initiative was born out of a desire to encourage active citizenship during South Africa's G20 presidency, and that the Add Your Voice campaign endeavours to promote inclusive dialogue, leading to inclusive growth. To discuss this further, we joined on the line by Celiwe Ross, Chief Human Capital and Corporate Affairs Officer at Old Mutual. A very good afternoon to you. Great to have you with us on African Business. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Thami. Thank you for having me, and good afternoon to your listeners as well.
So South Africa's G20 presidency may sound like a high-level global event, but why should ordinary South Africans, especially young people, care about it?
I agree with you, Thami. The B20, G20 can sound quite distant for people, but actually its impact is very real. The decisions that will be discussed and made at the G20 and B20 affect things like the price of food, the cost of borrowing, how easy it is to possibly start or grow a business. They shape policies that determine access to jobs, to credit, and to trade opportunities. So when South Africa leads these discussions, we actually have a responsibility to ensure that those discussions reflect our realities, that the graduate searching for work or the small business owner that's keeping the lights on or the family struggling with rising costs has a voice in those discussions. So this Add Your Voice campaign, we see it as something that Old Mutual is doing to help bridge that gap by turning global discussions into something that includes and actually represents South Africa's real experiences.
Now, you speak about inclusion there, and it's not the first time that you've mentioned that this is central to South Africa's leadership role. Why is inclusion important?
Well, firstly, for us at Old Mutual, but I think in general in the world, inclusion isn't just a moral choice anymore. It's an economic necessity. In South Africa specifically, too many of our people remain excluded from the benefits of growth. So we see it, for example, in youth unemployment, in rising living costs, and in the widening gap between those who can access opportunities and those who can't. And so if global conversations like those that are happening at the B20 don't include these perspectives, we feel they risk missing the very insights that could lead to better solutions. So that's why inclusion has to be at the heart of South Africa's presidency.
So let's talk about this campaign, the Add Your Voice campaign. Tell us more about it. I mean, we are nearing the end of all the meetings that have been held as a lead up and a build up to the G20. What has this campaign done?
Look, our hope is that ordinary South Africans can see themselves as a part of the story of the economy, the South African economy, the global economy. If South Africa can show that citizen insights can genuinely shape global priorities, then it actually sets a precedent for how inclusive economies could work anywhere. So at Old Mutual, we believe that the economy isn't just one story, it's millions of stories. And by bringing those millions of voices into global forums like the B20, we can help to build an economy that listens, that learns, and also works for everyone. And so we really want to be a voice. We want to use our access and our opportunity, our seats, to amplify the voice of South Africans in the rooms that we will be in by giving them access to those rooms, but also allowing their voices to be heard in those conversations.
So could you talk us through the mechanics of the rollout of the campaign? Was there a pre-recorded interviews in various areas. How have you packaged it?
Oh, no, not at all. It's actually a lot simpler than that. And it still is open to all South Africans to participate. So anyone can participate by actually sending us a message or a voice note. We have a WhatsApp line that we've dedicated to this campaign. That WhatsApp line is on 082 690 5619. So that's 082 690 5619. Or you can join the conversation on Facebook at our page at Old Mutual South Africa. There you can upload a message, you can send a voice note, you can shoot a video, whatever you feel you want to say. And you don't have to be an economist, you don't have to be an accountant, you don't have to be an engineer. You just need to share your perspective on what matters most to you and to your community that you would like to be made different, that you would like the global voices that will be at G20 and B20 to hear about. We feel that every story is going to help shape the bigger picture, and every voice will bring us closer to a more inclusive future for South Africa. And we're going to consolidate all the voices that we hear and put together a book or a package that we want to hand over to the presidency in South Africa to say, here are the voices of your people, here are the voices of our people, here's what ordinary, everyday South Africans are thinking, feeling, what they desire to come out of these discussions. And we hope that those will become central to the outcomes of this conference.
It's all really sounds like being a bridge and being able to use your networks for the general populace to have access that they ordinarily wouldn't have had. But I wonder, beyond this Leaders Summit, how would you as Old Mutual perhaps scale this or evolve the People's Podium concept beyond just the B20, G20 moment into something perhaps more sustainable, a sustained citizen policy engagement platform?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that's a great question because, like, this is a once-off thing. It's a once-in-a-lifetime experience. It won't happen in yours or my generation again, Thami. So this is important for this time, but I think sustaining that momentum is also important. And so we are working on a campaign and a plan that will take us through the years now as we start to think about how we activate this active citizenry in South Africans. We know that it's latent in us. If you think of what young people did in June 16 or 1976, or what women did in the 50s when they marched to the union buildings for the rights of women of color. It exists in us. And so we want to be able to engender that and create these sorts of campaigns, but also to make them super accessible in the places and the forums that South Africans generally deal with. So WhatsApp is an accessible platform. Facebook is. We want to partner with influencers who share our voice, share our passion, and share the need to democratize access. That's really the ambition that we have here, so that we make sure that we're dealing with real issues, having conversations about them, and amplifying them at the level where they can be heard.
Goliwe Ross, Chief Human Capital and Corporate Affairs Officer at Old Mutual. Thank you so much and all the best with this campaign.
Thank you, Thami. Thank you very much.
All right, have a great one. She takes us to exactly 4:47.
Thank you.
Be inspired. Stay informed. Channel Africa, the beauty of life. Now available anytime, anywhere with our new app.
Now, South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa says the construction industry is once again set to play a key role in the country's economy. Speaking at the second annual National Construction Summit in Boksburg, east of Johannesburg on Thursday, he highlighted that the sector accounted for more than half of the jobs created in the third quarter. The latest labour survey also shows a 1% drop in the unemployment rate. President Ramaphosa described the surge in construction jobs as a sign of an industry that's on the rise, poised to change lives. Ndebo Mokobo reports.
Seen as the backbone of the country's growth, the construction industry has been battling to ward off criminality associated with the so-called construction mafias at some of the construction sites across the country. But President Cyril Ramaphosa says their time and days are numbered.
We will not let anyone derail these efforts. We will not negotiate with construction mafias. We will not yield to the cable thieves or those who vandalize infrastructure. And we should really say we have declared war on the construction mafias, and they will not stop us.
For his part, Minister of Public Works and Infrastructure Dean McPherson, on the other hand, said they are slowly but surely winning the fight against construction mafias. He said since their last gathering in Durban last year, A lot has been done to rid the sector of criminality.
We signed the Durban Declaration together with the South African Police Service and the National Treasury. It was our response to one of the biggest issues facing the industry, the so-called construction mafia. The declaration was government's line in the sand, a commitment to restore law and order to construction sites and end the reign of terror that was choking investment, delaying delivery and putting lives at risk. Since that moment, we've seen over 770 cases of construction-related extortion and intimidation reported across the country. Of those, 241 arrests have been made, and most importantly, 176 individuals have been convicted.
With some of these cases mainly reported in KwaZulu-Natal, Minister McPherson says they have recorded a significant reduction in that province since their intervention.
In KwaZulu-Natal, which was considered the hotspot for construction mafia-related activity, we've seen a massive drop in monthly site disruptions, from over 60 incidents a month last year to less than 10 a month today. And this is due to the coordinated action that we've taken with the police, business, and our public entities. We've established dedicated hotlines for communities to report stoppages as they happen, and we've worked closely with our construction companies in a bid to restore rule of law. The police and the private sector security agencies are now working together to dismantle criminal networks.
And with the construction industry having contributed over 50% of the jobs created in the last quarter, President Ramaphosa has hailed the sector as the backbone to spur growth and development.
Infrastructure is poised to once again become the flywheel of our economy. Infrastructure investment is one of the most effective levers of stimulating economic growth. This is evident in the statistics that we have just seen earlier this week. The quarterly labor force survey indicates a decrease in official unemployment rate from 33.2% in the second quarter of this year to 31.9% in the third quarter. And as it was the biggest contributor with 130 new jobs, these statistics reflect an upswing in the industry.
The two-day meeting that brought together over 2,000 delegates from government, business, labor, civil society and civil engineering students from different institutions ends on Friday. I am Tebo Mokobo, Box.
Africa in Business on Channel Africa.
It is exactly 4:51 Central African Time, standing by for your Friday edition of Vue d'Afrique. We say bonjour, Madame Joël.
Bonjour, Thami. Bonjour à tous les auditeurs de Channel Africa. Vue d'Afrique, c'est pour bientôt, bel et bien, dans quelques minutes. Et il sera question sur Vue d'Afrique de la RDC, alors que les représentants du gouvernement et ceux de l'AEC sont à Doha pour mettre fin à la crise. La coalition populaire appelle Félix Tshisekedi à se retirer des processus. Et nous parlerons aussi du Cameroun, toujours dans l'attente de l'évaluation des dégâts des violentes manifestations de protestation contre la réélection de Paul Biya. Et nous parlerons également, Vue d'Afrique, c'est également le sport. Il y aura beaucoup de sujets en football, notamment les barrages du Mondial 2026. Merci de rester connecté. Merci, Thami.
Merci beaucoup.
Get the news, music, and lifestyle of Africa on Channel Africa, the African perspective. Keep Africa in your hands. Connect to our website for all your news, sports, and cultural updates. channelafrica.co.za. Africa in Business on Channel Africa.
Now, traditional leaders in South Africa say it's time that they tapped into the economic power that their communities present. They said that as government and private sectors look for sustainable ways to stimulate rural economies, as traditional leaders, they are uniquely positioned to bridge the gap between policy and the people, and that they are pivotal in promoting inclusive growth, agriculture, tourism, and small business opportunities. Inkosi Malusi Zondi of the Bambata clan joins us on the line to discuss the evolving role of traditional leadership in shaping South Africa's economic future. A very good afternoon to you, Inkosi Malusi Zondi. Thank you for joining us on Africa in Business.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Greetings to the viewers. Thank you so much. It's good to be here.
So let's look, Nkosi, at the various roles that you've held in the business sector. What were some of the barriers that you've identified that have made it difficult for traditional authorities, for businesses, as well as for government to actually work together and achieve sustainable results that are mutually beneficial for all stakeholders?
Thank you so much. Well, one wants to appreciate isilo samabandla onke, Inkosi Misuzulu kaZwelithini, the king of the Zulu nation. We highly appreciate for him to point us to be his eyes and ears on rural urban areas and deep rural areas in order for us to achieve empowerment. Since I've been in this chair, I must say, there's too much which one is currently observing, knowing very well of our background and our history in lobbying, advocating for Black empowerment in our communities. It's one of the things that we have observed, that most of our areas which are run by our chiefs, they are underdeveloped. And most of the areas which are run by our chiefs, economically, they are very low. Developments have not been executed, but there is a huge difference between the traditional leaders' authority versus the councillors in the area. Because it seems like our chiefs, although they're in government, but they are not very much respected. Most of them are not in a clear position to be aligned with a strategic mainstream economy purpose. So our duty as our chiefs are not aligned with the mainstream economy is to teach them, educate them about them governing their societies. We are having a very serious, huge gap between rural areas governed by the traditional authorities versus those which are easily governed by government and the councillors in the areas.
And that brings us to my next question, the role of traditional leaders. How are traditional leaders or the chiefs contributing to economic development in rural areas, and how can they be better capacitated in order for them not just to be symbols of traditional leadership, but they actually have political gravitas as well and influence?
One, to address that question, we'll need to question ourselves in terms of credentials of our chiefs and kings, because most of our positions are inherited positions. And you question yourself in terms of the level of education that currently our kings and chiefs are having. Secondly, the dignity alone, beside the education level, the dignity of our kings, by virtue of that, the enrolled areas, most of them, I don't know, it's just an assignment that we need to be responsible on. Because although COGTA, I know very well that COGTA is educating our kings, our chiefs, they are having regular meetings. But the challenge is, in order for us to speak of economy, there must be an industrialization happening in our areas where the kings are governing. There must be activities which are happening. So our duty is to teach our people, our kings, that local economic development is highly essential. But even if they are taught, government in all spheres must have a willingness to empower our kings to say they must preside over strategic developments in order for them to create opportunities, skill young people, create opportunities for women, beside them becoming a governing body that only speaks about principles on how to become a good child, principles on how to negotiate, even legal issues. Sometimes our kings, they only preside on those matters beside looking to issues of economy.
My apologies, Nkosi Zondi. I'd like us, before we wrap up, for you to just touch on this issue, because it's a very thorny one, and that's the issue of land ownership. It still remains a very key issue in rural development, and we know and understand that the chiefs have the legal custodianship of the land on behalf of the communities that they preside over. So the question this afternoon is, how can these communal lands be used more effectively to attract investment, but also to empower the communities?
Yes, it is very true. The land belongs to the king, Inkosi Musizulu kaZwelithini, as our isilo. So that land currently, as the current chiefs leading, we are given a task and a responsibility to preside over. Now, it is highly essential for us to motivate investments coming in. Let me make an example. Currently, there are developments that are happening in KwaZulu-Natal where we have partnered with SOEs of Leonature of Sandral, implementing road infrastructural developments. There, you've got supply of numerous activities and items. You've got your concrete, you've got your asphalt. We are motivating our own area where the land is currently being developed. That the kings must be responsible, therefore, to partner with those developments that are coming in. As we have always mentioned.
Nkosi Zondi, we're going to have to unfortunately stop now, but I am going to ask you if we can please continue our conversation during the course of next week. There's still quite a bit to unpack regarding this issue of land, regarding the issue of investment, empowering communities, and also what the vision, the ultimate vision of His Majesty King Misuzulu kaZwelithini is. So I do apologize that we are ending our conversation now, but I hope that you will be able to avail yourself as we continue next week.
I highly appreciate it. I'm always available. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Very much appreciated. Well, that's how we come to the end of this week's edition of Africa in Business. That was Nkosi Malusi Zondi of the Bambata clan, who's been tasked with driving the revival of rural economies. From myself and the entire team here at Africa in Business, we hand the reins over now to Vue d'Afrique and the French desk.
Vue d'Afrique, un magazine des actualités en français sur Channel Africa. Rendez-vous du lundi au vendredi avec Joël Mouteba sur Channel Africa de 15h à 16h, temps universel.